Good morning, everyone. There's debate in the House and discussion happening, and Mr. Poilievre put together this 10-minute speech. The whole speech is worthwhile. You should watch the whole speech. Link is in the description. And we're going to go through it. I've got some corresponding clips to show you, clips he references. I've got a couple of clips to show you that he talks about, but we're going to watch like 4 short clips. But honestly, the whole thing is worth watching. Okay, so here we go.
Been far too long and so much has changed. For one, you are the proud owner of another $10,000 of debt. Yet that is the per capita share of every man, woman, and child in Canada. $380 billion deficit this year for 38 million Canadians equals $10,000 per Canadian, or $40,000 for a family of 4. Now, I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, but I haven't met a lot of people who will tell me that their family has received $40,000 in COVID relief benefits. In fact, even if you received the CERB for a full 16 weeks, that works out to $8,000. And the majority of Canadians did not even receive that CERB, although...
So that's a good overview. And then Mr. Poilievre does a good job, like the threading of this speech, because you're telling a story with a speech. You want people to stay with you and go on the journey with you, right? That's what I try and do with my tabs. We're going on a trip. I'm telling you about what's happened. And he does a really good job. So it's hard to take some specific clips, but he's telling you the stakes here. And then he explains why those are the stakes. He explains how much this costs and then explains why, and he does it well with stories intermingled. Okay, I'm going to get to the next clip. Hold on. Here he's setting up that, yes, indeed, this is a crisis. It's a self-made crisis and one made worse by the actions taken by this government, but a crisis indeed it is. Here we go.
Ignore all of those failings and grant that indeed this is a crisis, but it's not our first crisis. Indeed, we fought world wars, we've had the Great Depression, the Great Recession, so how does this deficit compare to those deficits? It wouldn't be fair just to point out that our $380 billion deficit is 7 times the previous all-time record, because that doesn't adjust for GDP and inflation. So to be fair, let's compare the deficit as a share of GDP in inflation-adjusted terms. This year, the federal deficit is 17% of GDP. To compare, in the worst year of World War I, it was 8% of GDP. In the worst year of the Great Depression, it was 6% of GDP. In the worst year of the Great Global Recession, it was 4% of GDP. To put it in perspective, our deficit today is twice what it was in World War I, 3 times what it was in the Great Depression, and 4 times what it was in the Great Global Recession, all adjusted for the economy and inflation. Only once in our history has the deficit been bigger as a share of our economy, and that was in 1943. 1943, when the government was selling bonds to its people so that it could fight Hitler and Mussolini and Imperial Japan. They put those dollars to work to win the war, and yes, they had a deficit of 23% of GDP in that year. But you know what was different? When our soldiers came back from battle, you might have expected that, exhausted and heartbroken from loss, that they would want to take a prolonged vacation and put on the national credit card and let future generations pay the bill. But they did exactly the opposite. You know how long it took our grandparents to balance the budget after they got back from the war? 1 year.
So he gives how much it costs and the stakes and context. Okay? This is how much this cost. This is how much it cost you. And this is how much historically other crises in Canada have cost. And then he starts to break it down even further, and I'll get to the next clip. But he does it in a good way. See the story, right? You're threading the story, threading the needle. Okay, give me a minute. I'll cue up the next clip. This part he's telling you what the plan is. The Prime Minister is going to do this. Here it is.
Spends our money. he tells us that money is not even a real thing anymore. Yesterday, in his bizarre address to the nation, he told us that spending more actually costs less. I'm not joking. You can look it up. That's what he actually said.
Oh, sorry, I should have been on the screen there. I did look it up. And yeah, here's what he says.
How we can afford to do all this for Canadians. That's fair. The low interest rates mean we can afford it. And in fact, doing less would end up costing far more. Doing less would mean a slower recovery and bigger deficits in the long run. While we're dealing with...
I'm not sure how he squares that. Anyway, that was what Poilievre was referencing. Links in the description if you want to check it out. And carry on.
Said spending more money costs less. You know, it's clearly things now mean the opposite of what they say. This is not 1947. This is 1984. And we have a government engaged in doublespeak about the meaning of money. Now, they tell us that we can afford all of this debt because interest rates are low. And they're right, interest rates are incredibly low, stoked by the fact that central banks are producing an unprecedented amount of fake money through keystrokes at their bureaus. But those rates are not going to be low forever. Unless you believe that the debt will be paid off before the rates rise, then you have to believe that we've got trouble down the road. This government is not planning to pay back the debt ever. In fact, its own projections suggest that the debt will grow every year forever. And so, are they really expecting us to believe that never in the future will we return to normal levels of interest rates?
Okay, and he again does a good job. Here he says, what's the difference between 2 and 5? And somebody says 3, and he says, yes, but when you look at it with regards to debt, 5 is more than double 2, right? So if you double the cost of borrowing, then that's really problematic on $1 trillion, right? And he goes through the math on that as well. It might be worthwhile to watch it. Hold on a second here.
Let me put it into perspective. This year, the effective interest rate across all of our debt will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 2%. That's not the bond yield today, but it's the average across the entire stock of federal debt, about 2%. The average over the last 2 decades is 5%. Do you know what the difference is between 5% and 2%? Someone said 3. They'll almost be right. 5% is more than double 2%. It is an increase of over 100%. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it is a massive increase and a massive change in our budget picture. When you more than double the interest rate applying to over $1 trillion of debt, you massively increase the amount of money diverted from social programs into the hands of wealthy and greedy bondholders, those people who lend us their money. They're not in charity, Mr. Speaker. They're in it for profit.
Okay, so stakes, what's going to happen? What's the plan? And, well, we don't really have a plan because money's not real anyway, right? Yeah, who cares? Here's the National Post saying Liberals propose to boost pandemic benefits to $500 per week, up from $400 per week. Wonderful. Let's spend our way out of this. Mr. Mulclair is saying, well, here's Cabinet pleads for urgent passage of bill promising more than $39 billion in new pandemic relief. And this is a Blacklock's report. So another $39 billion of money for relief. This seems like a really bad idea in the context of what Mr. Poilievre was saying. This package is, of course, to make sure that the NDP vote for the throne speech, vote and maintain the confidence in the House, so no election. And, well, this is City News reporting. The NDP can't say for certain if they're going to support the Liberal Party in a confidence vote, but the leader, the Jagmeet Singh, says talks are going well. Right, talks are going well. The stumbling block appears to be proposed paid sick leave program. they're negotiating. Talks are ongoing. They're looking at chopping the wood on that pesky thing. But fundamentally, they requested more spending, and the Liberals gave more spending and fast-tracked the passage of this urgent passage. But remember, they prorogued Parliament in August and prorogued it until today. And now there's urgent spending, or yesterday, the 23rd. Now there's urgent spending? Today? Oh my goodness, we just realized it's urgent. We've been on vacation for a month, but prorogue Parliament, urgent. So Mr. Mauclair, the former leader of the NDP and a CTV talking head, says this is a big get for Jagmeet. He says this is a nice win for Mr. Singh. His tone yesterday was perfect. I think the Liberals had this in their back pocket all along. And I'll let him say his piece. I think that he's not wrong. I think that this was... I said you need only one. You need either the Bloc, or the NDP, and the Liberals knew they could craft a plan to speak to that NDP. Oh, here we go.
I think that his tone yesterday was pitch perfect. He talked about emotions, talked about people, talked about fighting for the average Canadian. Standard themes for the NDP delivered perfectly by Mr. Singh. I think that the Liberals had this in their back pocket all along. They knew that there would be an ask from the NDP. It allowed them to appear gracious, maybe court a little bit of the base of the NDP with the action today. But nobody in their right mind wanted a fall election. And I have a feeling that Mr. Singh has been given a face saver. Mr. Trudeau's been given a way to say, we're going to continue on and fight the political battle after Christmas, maybe an election late spring, early summer.
So sorry, my microphone again. So I don't think Mauclair's far off on that. Nobody in the right mind wanted an election. There's a lot of people who are upset with but the Liberals used the prorogue well, and it's not until October that we come back after Thanksgiving. No time to even talk to anybody about it, right? After Thanksgiving, you're going to call your parents and have that sit-down meal, and what are they going to say? It's not going to matter. It's not going to make the inroads it needs to make. The WE scandal is effectively dead unless the Conservatives can find some new stuff. And finding new stuff a couple of months later, well, have you watched CSI New York? How about any CSI, right? Like the more time that passes between the realization that they misstepped, and we's closed, right? We's shut down. So the realization that they misstepped and the time with which the investigation will pick back up, that's a lot of time. You forget, man. You forget. I can't quite remember the exact wording there. I don't have our documentation. When the company liquidated, we made sure that privacy laws are respected, and we liquidated all of that paperwork. I wish we could help you. It's just a darn shame that we can't. Right? Yeah. Yep. Okay, so here's Aaron Werdick, and pressure is growing on the Prime Minister. He says, and new Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland to explain how they will shrink deficits in the years ahead. Moody's, BlackRock's seek roadmap from Trudeau for Canada's debt. And here's that. Yahoo Finance, Moody's, BlackRock seek roadmap for Trudeau for Canada's debt. And here we go. As Justin Trudeau prepares to reveal his new policy agenda, credit rating companies and investors, including BlackRock Incorporated, are looking for his plan for pulling Canada out of a record borrowing binge. Pressure is growing in the Prime Minister and new Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, to explain how they will shrink deficits in the years ahead. The government opens a new session of Parliament Wednesday with a key speech outlining its main priorities. One agency, Fitch Ratings, has already cut the nation's ratings. Moody's Investors Service, S&P Global Ratings, and Morningstar Unit DBRS Limited have all kept Canada's rate at their highest grade, but want hard details on the nation's financial and growth outlook. The bond market, to be clear, doesn't share these concerns, at least not yet. Canada's borrowing costs remain historically low, with the 10-year benchmarks debt yielding 0.56% below U.S. Treasuries. Rates are being held down by massive purchases by the Bank of Canada, which has tripled its holdings of federal government debt since late March. Still, credit downgrades would hurt Trudeau's argument that these debt surges don't undermine the nation's fiscal credibility and could translate into higher interest costs in years to come. The government projects a budget deficit of 16% of gross domestic product this year, the widest since World War II. And Mr. Poilievre gave us the context for that and like the comparison to the other crises. We are well and truly above what historically has been spent on a crisis. And the plan to pay things back and get things back on even keel is nowhere near historically what Canada has been able to do. Usually Canada has a plan to get back on track. Even the 2008 fiscal crisis was managed well, and we had a budget surplus coming out of that. Clearly, like Justin Trudeau inherited a budget surplus coming out of the prime minister that managed the fiscal crisis. Now, he had a long run and was able to manage the crisis well, and he didn't have a lot of growth on the chart, but Canada didn't see the negative impacts to the same extent as some other Western countries or other countries impacted by the same crisis, right? So now we're in a situation where the credit rating agencies are saying, how are you going to pay for this exactly? And we're way, way over and above by many by 4 times, I think Polyev said, compared to the 2008 credit meltdown. So why the need for that? And why the need for the continued spending? Right, to maintain the NDP's confidence, right? House of Commons staffer says, at what point does the Liberals' refusal to bring an actual budget become contempt of Parliament? It's been 555 days since the last federal budget. I haven't double checked that, but I don't have any reason to believe he would make up that number. We've had a pandemic, a recession, a finance minister resigned since then. A fiscal update is not only not good enough, it's a slap in the face to Parliament and to Canadians. Yes. Here's Deputy Prime Minister Freeland and Finance Minister, and I don't think she can help herself with her mannerisms. And I mean, like, I can't help myself either. I have little stutters that I do, and I speak the way I speak, and I do with my hands what I do with my hands. There's no stopping it. But I just don't think that this is a winning politician. I don't think that putting this person in the prime minister's role, I think if Trudeau steps down, they're going to have a hard time selling her. Okay? Watch.
A failure to extend the legislation we are putting forward today could disrupt these payments with very harmful consequences for people's lives, for families, and for businesses across the country.
It was a
very harmful consequences. This is the 39, I believe this was the 39 billion she was talking about. Very harmful consequences. She doesn't have the growl that Trudeau's got. So I just want to address this really quickly as we're talking about spending. I said before that spending was the correct move, right? The correct move for the Trudeau government because the money is so cheap. I don't think that it was the right move for Canada, but the money being cheap and the crisis plus the crisis, manufactured crisis, yes, mathematically, the correct move is to take as much money and invest it as you can, right? And I was talking to my friend who's an accountant about this. We talk politics. We go have burritos and talk politics. And it's wonderful. We have a good time with it. And so that's what I mean by like mathematically correct. It would be much better to not have the debt in the first place, to follow Sweden's example and not have locked down the economy, not have the economy blow up. If we only had $20 billion of deficit, it would be the same old conversation in Canada. Now it's a whole other conversation. We have to talk about debt service. We have to talk about interest rates. We have to talk about how much that costs in real dollars and how much a credit downgrade would impact things, right? So the better move is not to get the debt at all. But the crisis plus the cheap money says you spend. That's the I don't know, the not knowledge. Hold on, I'm thinking of a specific word. Common knowledge. It's not the right word, but that's what an economist would recommend, right? Like, it's not surprising that that's what Canada did. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. But I think much better to have not gone into the debt in the first place. Okay, and I'm not saying that Canada should leave people in the lurch. But spending all of this money, and a lot of it has been spent out of the province, or out of the country, has not directly helped people. $40,000 per household, $10,000 per person, has not gone into their pockets, right? Like, most people would not say that they've been helped that much. I don't think, but maybe they have. Tell me in the comments if you think that this is worth it. Let me know. I'm interested, right? I'm interested in that. And I'm certainly not the last word on it either. I'm not an economist. I don't know the economy as far as an accountant would know the economy. So I'm a layman, just like Chrystia Freeland's a layman. What's the difference between 2 and 5%? Okay, Aaron O'Toole warns that the Liberals may bankrupt the country to win the next election. The next election is being negotiated by the NDP and the Liberals right now, Mr. O'Toole. And you're not a part of that negotiation. So, and they're going to win well, I think they're going to keep the government afloat, and I think they're going to get to at least springtime. And there's, lots more spending they can do between now and then. And it appears there's no check and balance to bring them to heal. This is an interesting story. This is an update. This is an update to a story that I mentioned before. Blacklock's reporter says auditors called in to review mismanagement of public health agency follows disclosures position of chief health surveillance officers specifically assigned to watch for pandemic eliminated 3 years ago. That's interesting. Recall Public Health Agency President Tina Naimanowski resigned, now advisor to the Prime Minister. Vice President Sally Thornton, in charge of stocking warehouse, retired following House of Commons Health Committee testimony. So, some people did some things not correctly, and this person, the former president of the Public Health Agency, got shuffled to the Prime Minister's cabinet. And just to remind you, she's been in other important roles in the past as well. Is this another Warnick, or is this another connected Liberal to go in and make sure that the Liberals' will is done? Here's the first report. Canada's Public Health Agency president resigns amid rising coronavirus cases. Tina Naimanowski, the president of the Public Health Agency of Canada, has resigned, leaving the agency in charge of leading Canada's response to the coronavirus without a leader amid rising cases of the virus in some of Canada's most populous provinces. In a letter to staff released by PHAC, Naimanowski said she needed to, quote, take a break and step aside so someone else can step up to lead the Public Health Agency tasked with coordinating Canada's response to COVID-19. Naimanowski was appointed to the job in May 2019, so less than 2 years on the job, and she resigns like that. Her resignation comes as caseloads of the virus have surged in Quebec, BC, and Ontario, BC, and Quebec, and criticism about the federal government's response to the virus in the early stages of the pandemic has mounted. According to her LinkedIn profile, Naimanowski worked as the executive vice president of the Canadian Border Services Agency and served as an assistant deputy minister at the Agriculture Canada and Public Safety Canada. And she says, I will support the transition of a new president, and then I'm going to take some time to reconnect with my husband, kids, and aging father and think about my next step. So she took a few days, and now the outgoing PHAC leader, Tina Naimanowski, has been named a senior official in the Privy Council office, the branch of the government that serves the Prime Minister and Cabinet. That was September 21st. So she resigned on, what day was it? September 18th. She took a couple of days and she's like, you know what? I'm going to hang out with Justin Trudeau. Weird. Isn't that weird? That's weird. City News is reporting COVID-19 testing in Ontario pharmacies begins today. They changed the criteria, though. Some Ontario pharmacies will begin offering COVID-19 tests today as the province tries to ease the burden on busy assessment centers. Up to 60 pharmacies are offering the appointment-only tests to certain asymptomatic individuals, such as those with loved ones in long-term care homes, close contacts of a case, or a high-risk worker. Meanwhile, the government announced yesterday that the province's assessment centers will now focus on testing those with symptoms, exposure to a case, and people involved in outbreak investigations. So it's not just open to the general public, but that was kind of the implication yesterday, that if you were an asymptomatic person, you could go and get tested at any pharmacy you want, and you should have access to a test, and blah, blah, blah. Testing is really important, except that the test is completely flawed and whatever. But I've talked a lot about that, so check my other videos. Brian Lilly says, the public health officials say we don't need a lockdown. A group of doctors in Toronto want Ford Nation to shut down the province again. The evidence doesn't back up the request. Ford should say no. Read and retweet. Yes, I'll retweet that, Brian Lilly. And he should say no. The evidence doesn't back up another lockdown at all. Here's the Telegraph. This is a British newspaper. I just thought this was funny. Again, take all of this masking news with a grain of salt, more than a grain of salt, because it's all bullshit. It's all BS. Okay, UK, the Telegraph says new coronavirus mutation could be evolving to get around mask wearing and hand washing. They're not going to admit they made a mistake. They're not going to admit they encouraged mass hysteria. They're not going to admit that the masks never helped in the first place. They're not going to admit any of it. They're going to say, you know what? It mutated, and now it gets around it. Oh, and by the way, stop touching your face. It's so ridiculous. So ridiculous. Okay. Mutated. Okay. Here's Alex Pearson, and she says, imagine if they got this tough on gun crime. Joe Warmington said, Toronto police corona cops will be more aggressive. I'm not reading this, but this is signaling that we're going in the direction of Australia for cracking down on corona people not wearing masks and going and being happy in restaurants together and stuff, instead of cracking down on illegal guns, for example. You know, how many people have been shot in the last couple of days in Toronto? There were more deaths in Toronto by bullets, and I can confidently say this right now because I saw a report this morning that said I think 2 people were shot and killed this morning in Toronto, which is a weekly occurrence, but there were 2 this morning. So today, bullets more deadly than coronavirus. And yet these Corona cops are going to come crack down on your freedoms. Here's an example. Officer Ronald Arsenault says 14 people were fined $880 each last night in Scarborough under the Reopening Ontario Act. Blatant disregard of rules meant to protect us all. Large crowds of 40 to 50 people. House parties, please keep them under control. You know, I say again, I don't fear sending my daughter or son to school or the daycare when there's a flu. I don't fear that they're going to die. I don't fear that they may even really fall ill. And I don't mask up. Daycares get cases of really contagious things, fifth disease and impetigo, all sorts of really, really contagious stuff. Stuff you would be like, we've really got to be concerned about this. And they put a sign on the board, and most parents drop their kids off happily. No masks. Have fun. See you later. I hope you don't get sick. And most of the time, they don't get sick. This is the world gone round the bend. This is just my own I don't know if other media people watch me, but if media people watch me, Stephen Guilbeault today is having on Friday, September 25th, I invite Canadian players in the information sector to join me for a town hall meeting about the sector's recovery in the context of the pandemic. Information sector. What does that mean? I feel like they're going to define it and tax it and monetize it. This was funny to watch. Catherine McKenna really believes, I think she's a true believer. I think she's a true believer. She's one of these people who's said in the mirror, like as she's brushing her teeth, she's got liberal talking points and she's just repeating them in the mirror. She's like, this is true. This is real. It's real. But watching Kian interview her was kind of funny. So Kian Bexty says, apparently I am the source of all of Catherine McKenna's woes. Reporting caused her broad dislike among Canadians or something. Or my reporting has caused her broad dislike among Canadians or something. She hates that I expose her lies and scams. That's why she got so triggered today. Watch the video. It's like 30 seconds. I'm not gonna play it now, but go watch the video. If you're gonna watch 2 videos, watch the whole Polyev clip and watch this one because it's worth it. It's worth the 11 minutes, I promise. And I know you spent, it is 27 minutes. How do I run out of time at 27 minutes most days? That's weird. It is weird. Thanks for watching, everybody. Go check out those videos and check out CanadaPoly.com, check out CanadaReport.co, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.